Filmmaking is constantly changing and innovating, and that's generally a good thing. Due to the geometric rate at which technology moves forward, filmmakers are forever getting to grips with new toys and techniques which let them do new things with the medium. But it's also fair to say that some cinematic tricks have become overexposed through their blatant overuse in movies. And there came a point where a film used a flourish in such egregious, objectionable fashion as to basically ruin it. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with Whatculture here with 10 movies that ruined awesome cinematic tricks. Number 10. Shakey Cam in The Bourne Supremacy and Ultimatum. Let's kick this list off with a pair of movies that simultaneously popularised a cinematic technique and inadvertently ruined it. The Bourne Supremacy was directed by Paul Greengrass and received a lot of attention for its unconventional cinematography, combining shaky camera movements and quick-cut editing to bring a uniquely frantic energy to the action sequences. And so the term shaky cam was born. Though Greengrass's use of artificial camera shake was criticised by some, it generally remains the most praised instance of shaky cam in action cinema, due to primarily Greengrass's clear understanding of spatial geography while assembling these scenes. Basically, we still always know what's going on. But Hollywood en masse took the wrong lessons away from Greengrass's pioneering use of shaky cam, with lazy and/or incompetent action filmmakers relying on the technique as a crutch. From the mid-2000s onwards, for around a decade, countless action films used shaky camera work and frantic editing to artificially amplify the energy of scenes that felt sluggish during shooting, and also to ensure they didn't need to figure out complex fight choreography before filming. Looking at you, Taken 2. Number 9. Digital doubles in Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. There is nothing harder to recreate as a digital effect than the human form. Our faces and bodies are so subtly complex that it's little surprise even the most talented visual effects houses have struggled to produce believably lifelike digital doubles of actual people. The tech is impressive, no doubt, but the debate over whether or not actors were on the verge of becoming obsolete was well and truly stamped out by the release of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. Digital doubles were created of both Carrie Fisher and Peter Cushing, using reference material from the earlier Star Wars films to resemble their younger selves, Fisher being 4 decades older and Cushing having died back in 1994. The thing is, these visual effects doubles are impressive to a point, yet aren't ever believable as living, breathing people. The subtle musculature of the face, and especially the glassiness of the eyes, looks ever so slightly off, such that we're never convinced we're looking at an actual person. Many fans noted the doubles as unbelievable, and therefore opined that Hollywood was still a long way off from fully vaulting the uncanny value where plausible visual effects humans are concerned. Number 8. Dutch angles in Battlefield Earth. A Dutch angle involves tilting the camera to one side in order to create a skewed, unconventional perspective, as is most commonly used to depict a character undergoing a tense or uneasy situation. It's a relatively divisive technique, all things considered, though it was brought into the realm of sheer infamy by 2000's Razzie-winning sci-fi dud Battlefield Earth. In an attempt to make the film's aesthetic resemble that of a comic book, director Roger Christian shot almost the entire film in Dutch angles, as has been widely ridiculed ever since. Hilariously, Roger Ebert had perhaps the final word on the matter in his damning review of the film, stating, "The director Roger Christian has learned from better films that directors sometimes tilt their cameras, but he has not learned why." Sadly, Battlefield Earth brought the Dutch angle into such risible disrepute that few filmmakers will now go near it, for fear of being in any way associated with that movie. Number 7. Speed ramping in 300. Speed ramping is the process by which a sequence, typically an action scene, is filmed at a high frame rate and the playback speed adjusted in post-production, allowing directors to switch between varying rates of slow motion and normal speed as they wish. Perhaps the single most iconic example of speed ramping occurs in The Matrix, what with its various bullet time effects moving between various rates of speed. The years that followed saw literally hundreds of movies imitate the speed ramping and bullet time effects, before the trick reached arguably its ultimate form in Zack Snyder's 300. Almost the entire film was shot at a high frame rate to give Snyder maximum experimentation potential during editing. And so many of the film's biggest action beats use speed ramping to a basically self-parodying degree. Does it look cool as all hell? Absolutely, but it also felt like an excessive endpoint for this cinematic practice, that Snyder had basically taken speed ramping as far as it could possibly go. Number 6. Impressionistic sound design in Tenet. Christopher Nolan's Interstellar received 2 Oscar nominations for its unique sound design, which often favoured loud environmental sound effects and Hans Zimmer's musical score over incidental dialogue. But Nolan took his aural experimentation too far on his most recent film Tenet, where large swaths of important dialogue were drowned out by the sound mix. Despite the vocal complaints, Nolan has stood firm about his radical sound mixes, recalling his surprise at how conservative audiences are when it comes to sound. The uproar about Tenet's muddy sound mix was significant enough that it will likely prevent other blockbuster directors from thinking much outside the box where adventurous sound design is concerned. Number 5. High frame rate in Gemini Man. One of the most potential-rich cinematic innovations of recent years is high frame rate production, whereby a film is shot and presented at a frame rate far higher than the usual 24 frames per second. And yet, despite its relative infancy in Hollywood, those few over-eager filmmakers to dip their toe might have poisoned the well already. First, there was Peter Jackson, whose Hobbit trilogy was screened at 48 frames per second around the world, sensibly alongside a 24 frame per second version, and yet the response from audiences was widely divisive. Many felt that the higher frame rate made the sets and visual effects appear more artificial, even as others argued that it was simply a case of our brains being so used to 24 frames per second that we couldn't conceive of a higher frame rate as cinematic. Yet the debate was perhaps put to bed by the release of Ang Lee's 2019 Will Smith starring actioner Gemini Man, which was screened in 120 frames per second as its major selling point. Beyond mixed reviews for the film as a whole, many criticised the high frame rate execution as ugly and cheap, making the film look less like a movie than, well, a mediocre video game cutscene. Gemini Man bombing at the box office basically helped kill mainstream interest in the high frame rate format. Number 4. FPV Drone Shots in The Grey Man. FPV drones are typically used in drone racing, with the operator wearing a head-mounted display to see the drone's position, and a select number of action filmmakers have started using the tech in their movies. The drones were used sparingly in last year's Red Notice, but given a far more prominent and impressive showing in Michael Bay's Ambulance, Bay drafted in Drone Racing League pilots Jordan Temkin and Alex Vanover to control the drones during the film's sustained chase sequences, providing gorgeously intrusive breakneck coverage that a conventional camera rig simply couldn't. The praise for Bay's creative use of FPV drones ensured it wouldn't be long before other directors followed suit in a major way. But the first imitator out of the gate has basically already left audiences tired of the technique. The Russo brothers' Netflix actioner The Grey Man also used FPV drones extensively throughout its production. Yet without Bay's sense of kineticism and understanding of cinematic space, the drone shots ended up looking goofy and excessive. Number 3. The Wilhelm Scream in The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. There are few cinematic staples more unforgettable than the Wilhelm Scream, a distinctive sound effect of a man screaming that's been sneakily placed in films for literally decades as a running joke among sound editors. The scream has been most prominently featured in the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises, and ultimately became noticeable enough that even more casual-minded moviegoers cottoned onto it. At that point, the jig was up. And so, depending on who you ask, the Wilhelm Scream included during the Battle of Helm's Deep in The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers is either the best or worst of the lot. During the battle, a Rohan soldier is struck by an Uruk-hai and falls from a wall, accompanied by the comically out-of-place scream. Some see it as a hilarious breaking of the tension, while others view it as an immersion-obliterating blight on an otherwise amazing scene. Either way, it feels like the Wilhelm Scream basically peaked at this point. It had already reached mass audience awareness by the film's release in 2002, and since then few instances of the Scream have proven so memorable. Number 2. Lens flares in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies. Lens flares can be a distinctive visual flourish when deployed sparingly, to add character to a scene, to impress an environment's brightness to the audience, or simply because it just looks really damn cool. But J.J. Abrams ruined lens flares for everybody when he went hilariously overboard with them on several of his films, namely his 2 Star Trek movies and also 2011's Super 8. In these films, lens flares are visible in the majority of shots, which Abrams achieved by shining powerful lights at the camera lens during shooting. Of his intentions, Abrams said, "I wanted a visual system that felt unique. I love the idea that the future was so bright it couldn't be contained in the frame." During production of Star Trek Into Darkness, though, Abrams finally realised he'd taken the technique too far. He said, "I know I get a lot of grief for that, but I'll tell you, there are times when I'm working on a shot I think, oh, this would be really cool with a lens flare. But I know it's too much and I apologise." Abrams has since pulled back considerably with his use of lens flare, and given the vocal complaints from moviegoers about it, few filmmakers these days use lens flare much at all, let alone in creative and in imaginative ways. Number 1. Stagecraft in Thor: Love and Thunder. There have been few more promising filmmaking tech innovations in recent years than Stagecraft. That is, replacing green screens with large high-resolution video walls, which can create ultra-realistic backgrounds for filming. Beyond the benefit of having the actors situated in a recognisable environment rather than a green screen, Stagecraft also ensures the actors are lit correctly, while allowing technicians to dynamically tweak and alter backgrounds per a filmmaker's requirements. It's extremely impressive technology and has been put to terrific use on Disney's The Mandalorian above all else. Inevitably, Disney started recently branching out and using Stagecraft for their film shoots, most notably Thor: Love and Thunder, which used higher resolution video walls than The Mandalorian. But Love and Thunder also exposed one of the major limitations of Stagecraft. The wraparound video wall is relatively small compared to a more conventional set space, and so not particularly well suited to scenes involving lots of characters. In Love and Thunder, the Stagecraft scenes end up drawing a fair amount of attention to themselves, the characters largely being crammed into the frame to suit the specs of the LED wall setup. Compare this implementation to Stagecraft's use in The Batman, which proved earlier this year how brilliantly it could be used for small environments, such as the roof where Batman meets Gordon, while employing an artfully shallow depth of field. It doesn't really feel appropriate for splashier tentpoles like Love and Thunder though, and while Stagecraft remains a hugely impressive achievement, it's never going to make green screen totally obsolete.